Live from the sun-drenched cobblestones of the Eternal City, conversations crossing faith, culture, and current events. Civil discourse, civil debate, and the free exchange of ideas. This is Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot. And now your hosts, Bree and Joey.
And good morning from a sunny Eternal City. This is Intersections, crossing faith, culture, and current events. I'm your host, Bree Dail, joined by my ever intrepid co-host, Joey Meugniot. For those of you who are joining for the first time, whether on radio or online, I am an internationally accredited journalist, including accreditation to the Holy See as the Rome correspondent for the Epoch Times. You can also find me on National Catholic Register and other outlets. I hold a BA in History from Christendom College and a Master's in Foreign Policy and Diplomacy from the prestigious Norwich University. And I am a veteran Naval Surface Warfare officer. And Joey, good morning.
Good morning, Bree. I hope everyone is having a great start to their week. And whether you're listening on the radio or watching online, thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Joey Meugniot. I'm a political advisor, small business consultant, and an analyst. And today I'm excited to share with you some of our thoughts and analysis on topics and issues of the week and how oftentimes they are closely connected and intersect with one another. A lot's been happening over the last week. We're going to jump into some newer stories from or out of the church, out of the Vatican. And then we'll start moving over into some culture and some politics things that have happened in the last week that are pretty amazing. So with that being said, I'll hand you back over to Bree, and we can get us kicked off. Bree, what are we going to be talking about to start today?
Well, for those of you who are joining us, our show is broken down into three themes, usually news, impacting faith, and then connecting those parcels of news impacting culture, and then finally news and focused on current events, because they all intersect. And I think one of the things that we really enjoy hearing on our program is from you all. We get a lot of comments online, and hopefully one day we'll be able to integrate phone calls as well. So please join us online every Monday and feel free to put your comments and your questions online. And then when we integrate those phone calls, we look forward to having a civil discourse and potentially even debate with people on the news of the day. So one of the really interesting things about covering the Vatican is it's not only covering what's happened in the Vatican, but throughout the entire church, and not only throughout the entire church, but also how politics and culture intercedes with those particular areas. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that this week it was covered by all of the major press outlets. Pope Francis celebrated his name day on St. George's feast day. Jorge Bergoglio is his given name. And Pope Francis celebrated his name day this week by joining with the poor throughout Vatican receiving their second dose of the vaccine. Joey, what do you think about that?
Well, it's not how I would celebrate my name day, but, it is nice that the church does do something for those that are less fortunate or maybe in a disadvantaged circumstance when it comes to the vaccine. So whether you're for it or against or having your own thoughts about it, it is an amazing gesture to see that type of work happen from the church oftentimes. And we'll talk about it a little bit when we focus a lot on the negative. In this particular case, it was probably a positive. And, it's a nice way to give back to the community, especially here in Rome. And that has been so hardly hit recently.
Right, and for a lot of people don't know that Rome is was still under lockdown until today. Today's the first day that we are actually seeing some freedom throughout Italy as well. We're going to be able to go out for drinks tonight, Joey. First time of freedom since, when was the last time that we went out to Campo dei Fiori, to our little favorite spot?
I was trying to think about that earlier, and I can't remember. I know that it's been a while, but I really just can't remember. It's been so long since when we've been able to actually go out and feel like adults.
I think it was around Christmas time. It
must have been. We go out to go to the store, go shopping, those kind of things, but really there's not a lot. You can go out for a walk, but that's pretty much it. Bars and restaurants, cafes,
right.
None of that stuff's open. So and Italians typically eat significantly later than Americans are used to. So with a 10 o'clock curfew still in place, that will put an impact or a little damper on a few things. But
it's better than 6
it
p.m.
will be. Yeah, it's better than 6. It's better than not being able to do anything at all. So,
right.
And I think that's part of the commentary on all of this is that there's this new normal. We don't want a new normal. We want the old one. I want that one back. This
Right.
new normal is leaves a lot to be desired. So, and the other interesting thing is that there's been a lot of protesting. There's a Twitter campaign and a bunch of other things across multiple parties within Italy about ending the lockdown and the curfew, and how kind of ridiculous it is to have a curfew, considering that Italians do eat later. So there's been a lot of jokes and a lot of things going on in the Twitter sphere about the curfew and trying to end the curfew.
Right.
That doesn't quite make sense. So you open restaurants, but typical Italians don't go to dinner until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and then the lockdown or the curfew starts at 10. So yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But either way, I'm excited.
And people are really thankful to their government for giving them their freedom back. That's something I think is really funny, and Joey is laughing at me because it is kind of the boiling frog effect. Because we want to be able to stay out for as long as we want. Why 10 p.m.? What's this have to do with COVID? These are the questions that are continuing to be asked. We have seen protests all throughout the last month in Italy. I attended one, and we showed a video a few weeks ago showing the desperation of individuals working in the service industries, to the point that they were even clashing with police. And it went up and down Italy, and there was a protest here in Rome just 2 days ago. There was another protest about wearing masks outside. People are really getting to that point, and we're going to talk a little bit later about other videos that no coverage from the mainstream media of a massive protest taking place in England against the COVID lockdown measures there. And we're going to also talk a little bit about some of these churches that have, again, had to deal with police coming in and shutting down services, masses, and whatnot, both in Ireland. And we also saw that the Polish minister in Canada was revisited, the one that went viral a few weeks ago. He was revisited again by police. But before we do that, moving on, some very interesting things are happening out of Germany this next week. And Joey, I've tried to kind of explain to individuals who are listening right now. You may be a working mom, a stay-at-home mom. You're listening to us, or you're listening to us on the internet while you're, working at work or working from home. Sometimes you have to get to that bottom line up front, right? So Germany and the prelates out of Germany have had some real issues with some of the things that the Pope has done recently. And the Pope, in turn, has come back pretty hard-handed on the Germans. The Germans seem, many of the bishops and the priests and some of the cardinals seem to be very disappointed that the Pope has not become a Pope of change, substantial change, such as the CDF document recently coming out, a Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, coming out and saying, we're not going to bless homosexual unions. And the Pope has stood by that document. And yet, what we're seeing with the Germans is that they are saying they're not going to comply with what the Vatican has put out, and that this next week they are going to be presenting, and this is coming from the president of the German Bishops' Conference. They're going to be presenting, groups of individuals are going to be blessing same-sex unions, including priests and some bishops. So we are seeing a clash, and that clash tends to be a statement when there is a clash like that, questioning whether or not we are seeing schism. And so what is a schism? A breakdown of the church, a separating from the church, specifically from Rome. So what we are seeing right now is a pushback. And the Pope came out last week and he said, there are groups who are not based in prayer, who are looking to change the church. And it's very clear that all they do is destruction. And so it seems like he was, he's not going to come out and say this is the German church, but it does seem that he was pushing back again to the Germans saying no. And there is a little bit of a personal issue that the Pope has with Germany. When he was studying in Germany, it is rumored that he was not happy to how he was treated. He was treated poorly as a Jesuit in Germany when he was under his studies. And I don't think he's forgotten that. And I think he's also felt a little strong-armed at times by certain individuals in the hierarchy in Germany, especially those who are really pushing this idea of decentralization, or also known as synodality. And those same individuals are now pushing this. And a secondary note, the same prelate who is in charge of the president of the German Council came out this week, also said that he would endorse the reception of Protestants who wish to receive, rather, the Eucharist during an ecumenical service. And for some people who listen right now, they're saying, well, what's that big of a deal? That's kind of unitive, right? Except for the very core basis of what we believe as Catholics, right? We believe that the Eucharist is truly the true presence of Jesus, body, soul, and divinity. He is truly present in the Eucharist. Protestants don't. And so that separation, that core separation in theology, means they cannot be in communion with us and therefore should not receive communion. And most Protestants, when they realize that that's truly what we believe, will refrain, because they also receive communion within many of them, within their own Protestant churches, and those they recognize as symbolic. And so they will not receive in the Catholic Church because they know that communion is not, that unifying factor does not exist. There may be other areas of unifying factor with theology, but in that certain situation, it doesn't exist. So no bishop has the ability to say, yes, you can receive. And so there's another area of schism now being questioned with regards to Germany. So this is what we're seeing this next week. I would advise people to pray because this is a real serious story. We're talking about other conferences offline coming out of the Vatican, Joey. And there are these conferences that are bringing in A-listers and whatnot. And I think it's kind of funny that the media did their job and really pushed that out as, oh, shock, or, oh, yay, depending on what polarized side you're on. But in reality, the real serious stories are the ones that are impacting the church's core fundamental faith pillars. Joey, you converted from Lutheranism, right? You were Lutheran before you became Catholic. Is that correct?
Yeah, about close to 20 years ago or so. Yes, I did.
Did you know at the time when you were converting, were you ever taught about that fundamental belief of Catholicism that the Eucharist is the true presence of Jesus? So
yes, I was, and it's interesting, and that was a fantastic breakdown. I was riveted.
Thanks.
The breakdown of that news, because it's really fascinating. I mean, Germans historically, I feel like over
they
the
tend
few
to do
centuries
this.
Yeah. So who says history doesn't repeat itself, right?
Right.
So I found that to be really interesting, and that not no one, right? But there are very few people actually talking about this particular topic, and it is really important, and it is it's crucial for the church to sort this out and not worry about social media and what's popular and bringing in A-listers. There's like a big issue here that we haven't quite figured out yet, and this needs to be decided on, and it needs to be talked about, because it's not gonna turn out well. It just isn't. So I think that the breakdown you gave was fantastic, and why it's important. So with the time we have before our first break, where do you think this goes, Bree? Where do you think that this will, moving forward, what do you think, what's next?
Joey, one of the things that I'm looking at trying to do is, and hopefully pray about this, is social media is definitely an area of ministry, and definitely an area that could be used for either good or ill. And I'm going to be doing bottom line upfront little shorts on stuff like this. Where are we going to go? I pray that we're not going to see schism, but I don't see how an individual like this bishop can remain so while he's teaching directly against the doctrine of the faith and against Rome. Joey, when we get back, we're going to continue talking about some of the news out of the church, and then we're going to go into some of the news this past week out of the politics area. Stay tuned. Stay with us. Please go ahead and put your comments in our comment box, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. This is Intersections with Bree and Joey. We'll see you then.
Whenever morality comes up in discussions, some atheists argue the behavior patterns we call morality are merely the product of evolution, naturally selected for the survival of our species. But is this true? The answer is no, and here are some reasons why. First, if it were true God didn't exist and our moral behaviors were merely the product of evolution, well then the dictates of our evolved nature wouldn't express the will of a being beyond man. As such, there would be nothing to morally bind man's will and thus no moral obligation. Second, what if the behaviors we judge now as wrong, such as rape and murder, become beneficial for our species in the future? According to the atheistic evolutionary account, they would have to be morally acceptable. But these conclusions are absurd. Moral obligation does exist, and rape and murder will always be wrong. Therefore, evolution is not sufficient to explain morality. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
And welcome back to Intersections with Bree and Joey. This is Bree, and I'm with my ever-intrepid co-host, Joey Meugniot, out of the Eternal City, Rome. Thanks for joining us today. Now, if you're interested in what we've been discussing about what's going on in the church, or you have any questions, definitely drop some questions in our social media boxes where we'll be happy to answer them. Some of your comments as well, we've been getting them. I think, Joey, one of the things that we really find in Intersections really interesting is how this news impacts faith and culture and current events, this type of news. Because, what would we were talking on the other, before we went to break, what would happen, what would occur if we would see Germany schism from, the centralized portion? Again, we are a monarchy, the church is a monarchy. So if Germany says, okay, we don't want to talk to the Pope anymore, we don't want to engage with the Pope is wrong, synodality, we're going to break this down, and they go their own way, what we see is just another sect of Protestantism. And what that ends up doing is that you've got a group of bishops going off and doing their own thing. But what would be impactful with that, Joey, outside of, the tens of thousands, if not millions of people who are faithful in Germany, having to decide whether or not they split off with their own bishops and their priests or try to, form their own, churches. We haven't seen that since really the Reformation, that type of impact. But, Joey, what also would be really impactful is that Germany currently has a tax. And that tax, this is something that came over from the time that the church in Germany agreed before World War II with Hitler on a tax for religious, to belong to a religious organization. You would pay a tax to that to that particular church. So what the tax is broken down to, Joey, is that you identify as Catholic on the state. The state taxes you, and that's the way that you're able to have marriages and funerals and baptisms in the church. If you are not identified as such, you are not allowed to have your funeral, your baptism, your marriage in the church, right? So even if you don't attend Mass, let's say you're not a churchgoer, but you want to be buried in the Catholic Church, or like you want your kids to, go to First Holy Communion or something to that effect, you have to identify as Catholic and you have to pay the tax. So the church is extremely wealthy in Germany. And that's where you have a very low percentage of people actually attending church, but you have a very high gross. And so the impact would be pretty substantial if the German church was to schism. But God forbid, again, we see something like that occur. It's just very disheartening to see, the leaders of the German church really pushing very hard against what the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith has taught and what the church has always taught with regards to same-sex unions, and also with regards to the true presence of the Eucharist being violated. Joey, we're going to go forward because there's another, there's another leader who is actually doing the opposite from what we're seeing in Germany. And I just wanted to make mention of it because nothing has really been done in or covered in the news, in even the Catholic news with regards to this. Dear old Cardinal Joseph Zen from Hong Kong, who is every day visiting the prisons in Hong Kong and the prisoners of the pro-democracy movement, and he posts quite a bit on social media to try to keep the story on that, has had to take a little bit of a detour because the diocesan newspaper of Hong Kong, which he says is completely connected to La Croix International, which is very, very left-leaning French outlet, that this particular diocesan newspaper ran this very, very inflammatory article by a Jesuit who, and you can find all of this on the social media account of Cardinal Zen. I would recommend, if you are on Twitter or on Facebook, to follow him and to support what he's doing for the his people, for his flock. But this particular article blames a lot of the issues and the suffering of the church's lack of progress on both Popes John Paul II and Pope Benedict the 16th, and how they all, and this Jesuit said that they all sighed a sigh of relief when, Pope Benedict resigned. It's pretty inflammatory for a Jesuit to come out and say that. And Cardinal Zen also says that this particular Jesuit is very well connected to another Jesuit who's very well known here in Rome, Father Antonio Spadero, who is very close to Pope Francis. And I think that that's really interesting because about a week later, another famous Jesuit, Father Thomas Rees, came out and wrote an article that was printed, and I'm trying to remember which outlet it was printed in. But this particular article also came out very inflammatory and said that the traditional Latin Mass, which is a rite, is the old rite of the what we now call the Novus Ordo, the new rite, or the new order. Many people, including myself, and Joey, you've been to the traditional Latin Mass a few times too, with Cardinal Burke being one. Many of us attend. You would see, like, the majority of the people who attend were kind of young families. Do you remember, like, young families, young people? Do you recall that, Joey?
Yeah, so the Epiphany Mass was there was a lot of young families, a lot of young couples, little kids. That's who was there. And
a 3-hour long Mass. A lot of people.
Yeah, it was lengthy. It went the distance. But yeah, there's a lot of kids. I mean, there was a lot of kids sitting behind us. There was a lot of kids all around us, and there was a lot of younger people. It wasn't, it wasn't a Mass for boomers. It was definitely a lot of younger people. It was pretty interesting. I wasn't expecting that, to say the least.
Yeah, and what this Jesuit also connected to America Magazine, which is the Jesuit publication run by individuals like Father Thomas Rees, Father James Martin. One would say that tends to be towards the left. This particular Jesuit said that the traditional Latin Mass should be suppressed, and that only older people should attend, and that young people and children should be barred from attending the traditional Latin Mass. And I thought to myself, that was just, where are these people coming up with this? Never in Vatican II documents did it say that a traditional Latin Mass was to be barred. And this particular Jesuit also came out and said that Benedict the 16th took the authority away from the bishops. So within 2 weeks, I just find it kind of interesting that within 2 weeks of each other, these two Jesuits went out into not social media, but into media, and really put these op-eds out there with really no substantial support or documentation. It was their own opinions. And we've talked about this before, and I'm going to actually ask our producer to come out now because this speaks to a wider issue in media that I tend to push quite a bit, whether it's left or right, that journalists who present op-eds without supporting themselves find themselves in a situation of being propagandists. And who better to come out and say this than a well-known Democratic leader, Tulsi Gabbard.
The mainstream propaganda media and politicians, they want us to constantly focus on our skin color and the skin color of others because it helps them politically or financially.
I think that's really important. And again, it's a soundbite I'm going to keep because this is a woman who is definitely left in many of her views, but she's also really held accountable, the media, for pushing out propaganda. And it's very interesting because Cardinal Zen has called this particular outlet, his diocesan newspaper, has called them out and said, someone needs to apologize, retract, and correct. And no one's done it yet. And Tulsi Gabbard, who is on the left, is coming out and saying, if you are continuing to propagandize with regards to something like racial tensions, you are doing this for a political reason or for money. Retract and correct. Joey, your thoughts?
I have so many. So first, I think progress for the sake of progress is not necessarily a good order for things. So just to be progressing the church in a direction for the sake of doing it probably ought not to be done. And if you're looking at barring or banning or, dissuading people from going to the, Latin Mass, I'd be starting to ask the questions as why? Like, why is it such a threat to you? Why is it so important to you that I not be able to do that? And we talk a lot about individual liberties, and one of the things that I think Americans take for granted, and we see this in Ireland. There was a story out of Ireland. There's another one out of Canada. We take for granted a lot of the things that, a lot of the rights and our abilities to worship. We take for granted, and you see, like there was a video online this morning of them shutting down a mass in Ireland. Super anti-Catholic country, right? There's another one out of Canada where that same pastor that they tried to shut down mass for before, and he called them communists and Nazis and Gestapo. They did it again, and he kicked him out again. Well, he's not Catholic. He still speaks. He's becoming quite the popular figure because he says a lot of things that a lot of people don't, or that a lot of people are thinking. Right. And like I said, as Americans, we take a lot of these things for granted because we don't typically have to deal with that because of the constitutional protections that we have. And as we continue to progress and we start to see this kind of divide, and the it's always almost exclusively figures from left-leaning publications, left-leaning media, left-leaning religious figures, like there's a theme here. And they say it's for inclusivity, they say it's for fairness, they say it's for all of these things, but the only people, when you say it's for everyone, it's for all of these things, but then the way you implement it is by limiting how I can do something. I think we need to have a long, hard look at what you're saying and what you want to do, because by being so inclusive and by changing all of these things, I can't worship the way I'd like to worship now, or I can't go to mass, or I can't, take communion on the tongue, or what? Like, no, that's not how any of this is supposed to work. And it's getting to the point of I want to say like outright guffaw. Like, what?
Yeah, insanity. There is a lack of real understanding of reality here when it comes to like what is the end point, what is your end state. We're going to be talking to a Professor Jan Bentz, who is a friend of mine who did a talk about I would say a month ago, and we just published his an exclusive that I did for Epoch Times with regards to the foundation of a lot of these thought patterns of like breaking down authority and then rebuilding it in the way that they want the authority to be. And one of the things, Joey, is you say it's exclusively on the left, and I concur. A lot of times when it comes to pushing out this, it's based off of emotion, no real facts, no real data. It's just, if you don't do this, you're a bad person, or you should feel bad, right? But at the same time, we are starting to see that happening on the right. And it's concerning, Joey.
Yeah, it definitely is concerning. And the fact that they say it's really about how they feel and how it makes them feel about it, right? So by doing these things, they now feel better just having said it, right? Has nothing to do with you. Has nothing to do with making your life better or your situation better. It's really all about them. It's one of the most selfish things that you could do, because it's all about them and how it makes them feel. So that's where you get virtue signaling and a lot of these other things. And I think that I said a little bit about this last week, but if our religious and political and cultural, we'll call them shepherds because that's the word I used last week, if we keep going down these paths, all we're going to do is find ourselves surrounded by wolves dressed up as sheep holding banners that say things like inclusive meals, right? So
right.
That's the direction that this is going in, is that we're being told that, like, oh no, it's for something else. It's the greater good, right? The greater good.
It's for the greater good, right?
Exactly.
It's like that. I'm not sure if you've seen that that movie, Hot Fuzz. Out of England a few years ago, just talking, and everybody says the greater good all at the same time. There is that element. And if I am like above playing puppet master, right, and if I'm looking down and I'm doing some analysis, and how do I get someone else to do what I think? One of the ways that we is to manipulate a narrative, right? Manipulate this narrative with and one of the things I put up on social media, I highly recommend people going and taking a look because it's actually quite interesting, is this whole build back better mantra that has been coming up. Build back better, hope in the future, not now, hope in the future, build back better, and then coming back and saying, oh, this is for the Great Reset, right? And what I have seen in the manipulation of those true things, those particularly true statements, they come out of all of these A-listers, these particular true mantras, is that the manipulation is to take that and go 3 steps further to create conspiracy and to mix the other side, the critical thinking side, in a reaction of emotionalism. So on the left, it's about how I feel when I come out and I say something to you, right? Or I put out an op-ed. On the right, it is reactionary anger, injustice. I'm a victim and victimhood. Instead of looking at the virtue of being peaceful and long-suffering and engaging in civil dialogue, it is, I'm going to condemn you and you are condemned and nothing you say is right. And that's not civil dialogue or discourse or debate, because there could be some relatively true statements coming out of the left that you can actually have a dialogue on and get to a point of, just maybe even get to a point where you can have, and I know that you had this was something that you started to engage with when you were coming out of the Democratic Party and going in towards conservatism, is that you actually started to say, hey, wait a second, there's a lot that I agree with when I actually sit down and have a conversation, Joey.
Yeah, so that's part of the problem. One of the reasons why I left the Democratic Party in the first place is because I couldn't have that anymore, even with the people that I supposedly agreed with or thought the same things, right? So that's one of them. The other thing that you mentioned too about the Great Reset, and it's just moving money around from one place to another and figuring out how they're going to spend billions and billions and trillions actually of your tax dollars, some of which they haven't even collected yet because they can't. There's no amount of
World Economic. It comes out of the World Economic Forum. This is the Great Reset is not something that comes out of traddy trad world or Archbishop Vigano coming out. This was actually something that has been said for I think it's been at least a decade that they've been looking to do something like this.
Yeah, and that's it's the language that comes off of it, right? So the hope, right? We have this hope, hopes ahead, hopes, hope will come. The things, all of that great sounding, things will get better. Better for who? Certainly not better for Americans. Certainly not better for Catholics or Christians. It's not looking a whole heck of a lot better right now than it was in 6-8 months, a year ago, or 10 years ago. It seems like every time they tell us that hope is on the way and things are changing and we're going to build back better and we're going to do all these other things, it's at the cost of individual freedoms, of liberty, and that includes the God-given right to worship freely, right? So all of those things are being put to the back burner, being mortgaged away, if you will, to have whatever this greater good corporate takeover style, oligarchy that we're moving towards. It doesn't scream to me that there's, any kind of fundamental goodness coming out of it, other than it's good for the people that say that are telling us that it's good, and it's pretty much bad for everybody else. So I guess if you're at the top of the pyramid on this Ponzi scheme, then you'll do well. It's like they want part of the climate plan that they just announced that they're going to be discussing in Congress, that President Biden put out, was that they want to limit the amount of red meat. But judging by you could eat basically 4 burgers a month. So
right.
Judging by that, and you know what I'd be willing to find out, or not willing to find out, but what would happen eventually is that you'd find pictures of a bunch of the people that are saying we don't need to eat red meat eating red meat, like they'd be out to dinner
right.
at some 500 plate restaurant, $500 a plate restaurant, eating red meat, because that's what happens.
Rules are for thee and not for me, right?
Exactly. They don't want you to do those things, because that's bad. If you do it, it's bad. If I do it, it's okay, because that's that's how it goes. They did the same thing in Soviet Russia too. It worked out great for them. So anytime that the historical comparison is Russia, I'd like to move in the other direction.
Right, or China, for example, as well. One of the things that I think is really an interesting point, and and we have other stories that are going to be coming out too. We're going to be talking about, but one of the interesting points from Dr. Jan Bentz's talk on this is that fundamentally, the intent is right now for a lot of those who are putting out critical theory or critical race theory was to say, like, look, man being the master of his own kingdom, his own family, that centralized unit, building on that, going into like groups where you naturally have a desire to go into leadership, having a leader. That leader is there to kind of do diplomacy and engage, because everybody is freely joining into this group, and it builds, and that's how society is built, and that's why naturally we have leaders, right? And we elect those leaders in democracy to represent the groups, right? And it's a fascinating. Please go to Epoch Times, read it, because it was such a fascinating talk, and I look forward to having him on, because he's gonna talk a little bit about this. But critical theory was a reaction to what they were seeing with regards to fascism before World War II, coming out of the communist movement, out of Frankfurt and others, the Frankfurt School. And when they went to these universities like the University of Chicago, for example, they really pushed this idea of breaking down all of those traditional ideas of leadership and the fundamental idea that man is that way, that strength, that strong man, the one that moves forward and engages in work and engages in leadership and in his family. Break all of that down, and we've seen that in our society in the last 50 years. Break all of that down, but the intent is to rebuild man in the image that they desire, which then, because Cicero would say man is driven towards that society, that grouping, they're just going to follow leadership. And at that point, then we have leaders who are leading in a way that goes towards a particular end that benefits them. And this is not new. This is something that we have seen over and over again, especially coming out of communism, where, rules are for thee, but not for me. And that's dictatorship, right? That's tyranny. And so what we saw in the last week with regards to, the trial and politicians getting involved in the trial of Derek Chauvin, right? People have come out and said there's a question to whether or not that was almost tyranny for politicians to get involved before a verdict is read, before jury has gone to, and we've heard from the jury now saying that they were afraid of what would happen to them. We heard that witnesses had former houses sprayed with pig's blood and a pig head left. I mean, that type of tampering leads towards tyranny. Mob violence leads towards tyranny. But mob violence is led by individuals. It isn't just something that's just happens to happen. There are people who lead. So that comes from Dr. Jan Benzes. I look forward to talking with him further on that. But before we go to break, and then we'll come back on this too, because I think it's really important in the United States. We were talking about recently, Cardinal Zen, pushing out and saying we need to hold individuals accountable who are coming out and saying these things, and that bishops, need to be held accountable as well. We were talking about that with regards to Germany. And if you have any questions for us or you have any comments, put them into our comment boxes on social media, or even after the show. If you have any questions, contact Joey and I. Know that's something that we really look forward to hearing from. But a really difficult story coming out of Knoxville, Tennessee. A second bishop now in the United States is reportedly going to be going under Vatican's new Vos Estis investigation. So what is Vos Estis? And we'll talk a little bit about that on the flip side and after we come back for a break. But this particular bishop is Bishop Sticca. And Bishop Sticca is a controversial figure. During the lockdowns of the last year of COVID, Bishop Sticca permitted for traditional Latin masses to be said. But when he heard that individuals were requesting to receive the Eucharist on the tongue, Bishop Sticca came out and said, if you do this, I'm going to shut you down, right? Which is canonically very difficult. And there was pushback, and Bishop Sticca was very vocal on social media. He's a very strong personality on social media. He follows me on social media. I appreciate that, Bishop. And Bishop has come out in this article from The Pillar. We'll talk more about this when we come back from break, but we've got to pray for our bishops because these are really difficult times. They are seeking mercy for individuals, but at what cost? And especially in these very heated times where there's a lot of issues with abuse, is it the right thing to be done? So when we get back, Joey and I will look forward to talking more about this, but very serious subject. You are here with us on Intersections, where faith and culture and current events meet. I'm Bree, your host, with Joey Meugniot, my co-host, and we'll talk to you again shortly.
Some atheists argue that the universe is a mere brute fact. The universe just exists, they say, and that's that. It has no explanation at all. How can we respond? First, atheists wouldn't allow theists to use this argument. Can you imagine if a theist said, God's just a brute fact, no rhyme or reason to his existence? He'd be laughed off the stage. Second, the argument is self-refuting. It denies rational argumentation for the belief itself. If brute facts are possible, well then the conclusion, the universe is a brute fact, itself might be a brute fact, having no connection to truth or logic, in which case we would have no reason to accept it as true. Therefore, the argument defeats itself. For these reasons, we can say that it's absurd to argue that the universe just exists without any sort of explanation. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Your Odyssey begins at the University of Dallas, the premier Catholic liberal arts university in Texas. With campuses in Irving and Italy, UD's rigorous core curriculum sets it apart. An education rooted in the great works of Catholic and Western tradition. An education that ennobles and enables students in their pursuit of wisdom, truth, and virtue. Undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs available. Start your college odyssey at the University of Dallas today. Go to udallas.edu to learn more.
And welcome back to our last segment of Intersections. I'm Bree Dail, your host, with my co-host, Joey Meugniot, and this is Intersections, where faith, culture, and current event meet. Oh, Joey, before we go into this very difficult topic on Vos Esti's investigation that has been opened against a bishop in the United States, the second bishop to have this investigation opened. I have some good news for people who are listening right now, and I always love to share the good news. The Vatican came out this past week, one today and one, I think, 2 days ago. Two pretty well-known saints are being canonized. One has already been canonized just because her cult has been for so very long recognized that the Pope has just blanket canonized her, and that is Saint Margaret of Castello. And she is known because, Joey, and this is something that I think would really fascinate you, she was abandoned by her parents because she had a lot of deformities when she was young, including being blind. She was abandoned, and the poor of Castello took care of her until Dominican nuns did. And then they couldn't take care of her anymore, and she was back on the street again working with the poor. And she became a third order Dominican nun and very, very holy, known for very, very holy works amongst the poor. And then another saint has been announced. Canonization will be coming very soon, and it's Blessed Charles de Foucault, who was known as the apostle to the Muslims. He was an army officer. So there you go, Joey. And he ended up becoming a hermit. And I think he was in Algiers for quite some time. And he led a life of real aridity. And he nonetheless showed a great zeal and kindness to the Muslims there. And yet he was uncompromised in his approach to the truth in Catholicism and his ministry. So, good news, right, Joey? We always need that out of the Vatican.
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure when you said that I would like one of them. I guess anyone that has had to stand in formation at 04 would probably choose a life of solitude in the desert as well afterwards.
Right, standing the watch, and maybe he just had enough of living with others at close conditions, and he knew how to make fire. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to talk about this story, but I think it's necessary for people to understand. So. Before the break, I said we were talking about a bishop out of Knoxville, Tennessee, who is right now about to undergo, reportedly by the pillar, Vos Esti's investigation through the Vatican. So what is Vos Esti's? Long and short. The Pope, during the 2018 sex abuse crisis in the church, which is unfortunately ongoing, the Pope made a declaration that bishops now who are seen to have covered up or impeded investigations into credible sex abuse themselves would be subject to investigation and potentially brought up on canonical charges. And we did see a bishop out of New York just recently hand in his resignation after Vos Esti's investigation of having done this. So this is Bishop Richard Sticca out of Knoxville, Tennessee. He is reportedly going to cooperate with this investigation, but I want to make a statement first from him. It's at the bottom of the article from the pillar. If you run that story, this is what he is saying. If you run that story, you're going to be embarrassed in a couple days, he told the pillar, because we followed the process, the procedure, and the review board was involved. The initial thing was a personal issue, and I handled it. It was all following exactly that. I am not covering up anything. I make no apologies. Now, so Bishop Sticka believes that he has acted correctly. This has to do with some pretty concerning allegations of a seminarian in his diocese that he has an affection for. This seminarian right now is living in his chancery and working to help take care of the cardinal, Cardinal Regali, who also lives in the chancery with Bishop Sticka. And, this has caused quite a bit of stir in the last few years with regards to Cardinal Regali and Bishop Sticka's closeness. But Cardinal Regali is getting up in age and needs help and support. And supposedly this seminarian, who has some pretty serious allegations against him, is now living at the chancery to help. Bishop Sticka claims in this article that is to help continued discernment for him while, they're doing some investigation behind the scenes and some formation. But Joey, I have to say, there have been situations in the last few years where seminarians out of the North American College have been dismissed for things, no allegations, personnel issues, no formation, just been dismissed. There have been situations where allegations like this have sidelined priests during investigations. So it's very interesting that now the bishop is really sticking to this, and why he engaged this particular seminarian. This is the reason why the Vos Estis investigations take place. Joey, what are your thoughts on this?
So there's several thoughts, but the most important ones are just, why did he get involved in the first place? And I think that's what's going to come out of this. He says that he didn't do anything wrong, so I guess we'll find out. But of course the optics are bad on this. It's not like there's no historical precedent for what you should or shouldn't be doing when these kind of allegations come up. Realistically, if you're a leader within the church, you need to become, you either need to recuse yourself from that particular investigation or topic, or handle it with such care that that there aren't any bad optics, right? You just can't continue. They can't continue to do these things. You can't continue to have someone in the diocese or a seminarian or a priest have allegations made against them, and for you then to treat them with preferential treatment or give them preferential treatment, which it looks like this does. It doesn't look good. I don't know all the details on it, but it certainly, definitely, 100% does not look good. The optics are awful. So,
especially to the victims, right? It doesn't, for individuals who have been victims to incredible victims. And this is always a messy thing. It's always a messy thing, especially when you're dealing with individuals who are adults. If it's adult and an adult, it's always messy, always. But we have to deal with authorities. One of the things, Joey, when you say you have to recuse yourself, the thing about a bishop is, and unlike what this Jesuit who had said prior to in the article that we discussed last hour, the Pope is given. I mean, the Pope, when you have bishops who are successors of the apostles, they are kind of they're the kings of their sees, right? So there's no one above them other than the Pope. And so they are expected to take care of these things. But one would think after 2018, everything would be made transparent, everything. And yet it seems like there is a pattern of a lack of transparency. Joey?
Yeah, of course that's what it looks like, because it isn't transparent. What I was trying to say a minute ago is just it doesn't. You have to be above reproach with these particular circumstances, and of course, there in the United States we have you have the presumption of innocence, but at the same time you need to be transparent and allow the investigation to go through without any interference on your part, or you putting your finger on the scale of justice. I know we talked about the politicians putting their finger on the scale of justice, but far too often in the last, 50 years, I would guess now, 60 years, priests and bishops and cardinals have been accused and basically found guilty of doing the same thing, in influencing the scales of justice and ensuring that the victims don't actually get justice. And that's what this looks like again. And we have to stop that. If we're going to change the stigma and the thought that this happens on a regular basis with the Catholic Church,
right?
We can't keep doing things behind closed doors and
No.
making things and having bad optics. It's not.
Where's the money
exhausting.
going? Yes. I mean, we talked about this last week. This is an ongoing investigation. I think from what I'm hearing, secular press now is getting information about this as well. Ongoing investigations into why the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops and why the organizations like Catholic Charities and CCHD are receiving taxpayer money for refugee resettlement. There's no transparency in that either. It causes people to then question the legitimacy of the faith by how we act. And I have to say, Joey, as we're closing, here I am talking about this Vosestes investigation. I hope it's all innocent. I really hope it's all innocent, because it's such a pain to watch this take place and this undermining of the authority of a bishop, right? But at the same time, here I am as a journalist. I've got to stick to the facts, and the facts right now and the optics are not good. They're not good. They're against this bishop. So he is now put on the defensive to have to defend his actions on this. And I have to say in closing, Joey, as a journalist, when you say you have to be above a reproach, it is the same thing for those of us who are living as journalists and Catholics, reporting on the Vatican and reporting on the Church. If we are not living above reproach, if we are not transparent, and we're all broken human beings, we're all sinners, and we have to keep moving forward towards virtue. It isn't moving backwards, but moving forward towards virtue. If we are not transparent and we're living a lie, that will come out and completely undermine everything that we do. Everything. Joey, your thoughts in close.
I think if you don't lie, you don't have to worry about lying. I think if you do what's right, you don't have to worry about the bad optics of it. So if you just align yourself with that, you don't have to. That's it. That's all I got on that one.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Another hour of Intersections. I'm your host, Bree Dail, and I'm with Joey Meugniot. Join us on social media. And if you like this, come back and listen to us again on next Monday. But for now, we look forward to hearing from your comments, and we ask you for your prayers. We're signing off. God bless. Take care.